Good evening, everyone. Myself, Kunal Singh Tehlan, Senior Executive Officer, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, ICAI, and I'll be your moderator for this event. Honorable Chairman DAB, CA Charanjot Singh Nanda ji, respected Secretary DAB, CA Amit Gupta ji, eminent faculty members, Dr. CA Durgesh Pandey ji, CA Uday Kulkarni ji, distinguished audience, and my colleagues. On behalf of DAB ICI, I welcome you to the webinar on overview of forensic accounting and investigation standards. Webinar, I'm proud to inform you that Institute has recently launched revised compendium of forensic accounting and investigation standards on 1st July 2023. These standards have now been mandatory for all ICI members with effect from 1st July 2023. To help members better understand these standards, the Institute has also launched implementation guide on forensic accounting and investigation standards. The purpose to organize this webinar is just to spread awareness and information about the importance of forensic accounting and investigation standards. Now, without taking much time, I would like to introduce a dynamic personality, a powerhouse of knowledge and experience, our own chairman, CA Charanjot Singh Nanda ji. Apart from chairman of DAB, Nanda ji is also chairman of Committee on Financial Markets and Investors Protection, ICAI. He is also chairman of Committee on Information Technology of South Asian Federation of Accountants. He is also vice chairman of Board of Internal Audit and Management Accounting, ICAI. He is senior most Central Council member of ICAI. I have short of words to give his introduction. So I just request him to enlighten us with his words of wisdom. Over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Kunalji. My compliments to Durgesh Pandey, the learned speaker of the day, Shri Uday Kulkarni, the learned speaker, Amit Gupta, the secretary, technical support Ayaz, and all participants who have come here to go home enlightened. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a proud moment for us. First time in the globe, we have come with 23 forensic standards. And not only standards which have been mandated to be compulsory. From 1st July 2023, we have come out with an implementation guide outlining guidance on each and every standard. 30 members, 20 groups worked for more than 2.5 months to provide guidance on each and every standard. That guidance was taken to the examining committee. The examining committee with a blend of senior people from industry as well as from the practice ground sat down and created a world-class document, which was later vetted by the review committee comprising of people at top positions. And then it went through 3 legal reviews. And then the implementation guide was released for public. It is there at the website. The revised standards which are mandatory from 1st July along with the implementation guide is now available for membership at large. We want to percolate, we want to make our members aware of these standards. The courts in India are now quoting these standards. So moving in this direction, we have thought that we should have larger benches, larger discussions, larger outreach programs, seminars, workshops, webinars. And in this step, we have today's webinar. The 2 best speakers who have been involved right from day one with the board and framing of these standards, Durgesh Pandey and Uday Kulkarni are here. So ladies and gentlemen, I won't take much कामयाबी फिर कदर ना होती किसी हुनर की और ना ही कोई लाजवाब होता. The English version is that if we got competence in charity, then no one would have been appreciated and no one would have been outstanding. So ladies and gentlemen, today we culminate an era of hard work to present before you the forensic standards and the implementation guide. The word and the profession is open for you. Go to all people to render your valuable services drawn on the lines of these standards. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks a lot. Over to Kunal Singh Tehlan, for his next proceedings. Kunal, the dice is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your magical words and sharing your valuable knowledge. And I also thank you for giving me the opportunity for becoming a moderator of this webinar. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to call our first speaker, Dr. C.A. Durgesh Pandey ji. I just want to introduce him. He is first PhD in forensic accounting and from prestigious National Forensic Science University, India, which is of national importance under the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. He is a chartered accountant and practices in the domain of financial crime investigation. He is DISA ICAI. He has also completed forensic accounting and investigative fraud prevention course from ICAI. He is also certified fraud examiner from ACFE USA. So over to you, our first speaker, C.A. Durgesh Pandey ji, Dr. C.A. Durgesh Pandey.
Thank you so much, Kunal. And as always, I wish I could clap and how do I say, in Hindi we have CT maar sakte the. I could have whistled to what Nandaji said. As always, and as Kunal said, his words are magical, excellent motivation, and probably, I hope our audience who are watching us now, who will be looking at the video, they'll realize as to how much effort has gone and probably how much effort the chairman, our honorable chairman, has put in to ensure that we come up with such a fine document in a record time, despite not compromising on a quality for an inch. In fact, when we had discussion, I always used to say that नंदा सर बहुत डिफिकल्ट है, टाइमलाइन बहुत स्ट्रिक्ट है, बोले आप अपना काम करो, आप चिंता मत करो, you please do your work, don't worry, we will not be compromising on the quality. I am really very happy that we have come up with such an excellent document which has gone through so many level of reviews and vetting. Kudos to the chairman under whose leadership we could produce, and I would be, I would be not be how do I say, do justice to myself if I don't thank the chairman for making us a part of this, coming up with such beautiful standards which are truly world class, first time on the globe, and these are excellent piece of standards. I practice in this domain, so probably these are one of the most helpful documents which we will be using. So there is always a selfish interest of mine that we'll be the earliest users of these standards. Thank you so much, Chairman Saab, once again for the opportunity.
Always there, Durgesh Bhai. Your contribution has been immense. Great.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, friends, let us now come to the technical discussions. I do have a presentation. In fact, the DAB has shared a presentation which we have prepared, a standard presentation which we'll be discussing so that we have uniformity of thoughts and uniformity of ideas. So we'll be discussing, all our discussion today will be based on those presentation. As it is said, the standards have become mandatory from 1st of July 2023. And then we have come up with the board has come up with a beautiful set of document called as the implementation guides. The implementation guides will help you to understand and to apply the standards. If you'll see the implementation guides, you'll notice that there are so many examples. The authors of the implementation guides, which I am happy to say I was a part of the team, we have tried to cover almost all cases which we could think of and which we thought that it may create a little bit of doubt in the minds of the users. So we have tried to cover all types of scenarios in the implementation guides. The implementation guide is filled with examples. Now, quickly, let me share my screen. I hope the screen is visible. This is our standard. This is our standard books on standard, which is as on 1st of July 2023. The older book that we have, the one as on 31st August, it had some minor changes which we did in the standards. Of course, the implementation guide is altogether a new document which was given by the board. But then the standards, it's the old document which was released on 31st August. but certain terminology, certain nomenclature has been changed. They have been modified in the standards as well. Now, the basic overview of this standards, the basic overview or the basic requirement. First of all, we would like to understand as to why at all we needed a standard. First of all, this is a very dynamic field. Every day we have different type of assignment. Every day we have different type of roles that we have to play. And in this, we are coming up with the standards. Now, how does and where does the standard helps? This standard, it tries to codify the best practices in the industry. It clarifies the expectations and the attributes. There are certain terminologies which were used by people in practice. It tries to standardize the terminologies. We also have the ongoing debate of whether it is forensic audit and why it is forensic accounting. I would try to shed some light. I do have an advantage because I was part of the drafting group right from very beginning. So probably I can articulate the thought process that went into the naming of the standards. You know, as practitioners, we always face that problem when we are asked a question as to how did you do this assignment? How did you conduct this engagement? Now, when we are asked a question like this, we need something to fall back as a practitioner. So if I'm put a question in a court of law, which is very much a possibility in these types of engagement. So if I'm put a question in court of law as to how did you prepare your report, I needed a fallback mechanism which I can say clearly and loudly in the court of law with the competent authority that, sir, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India has issued a set of standards which have been complied with while conducting this investigation. This brings a sense of legitimacy and this brings a sense of confidence even in the mind of the honorable judges. So that is the overall perspective. That is the overall perspective and objective of issuance of these standards. This will determine the minimum level of expectation that the user can have from the professional. Moving ahead, we have these 23 standards in which we have overarching document, preface. We have the preface. We have the overarching document contents of preface, basic principles, framework, certain key concepts. Then we have 200 series, which is the engagement management. 300 series is executing assignment. 400 series is specialized area. 500 series is reporting result. And 600 series is the quality. Now, as we discuss the first set of documents, which is the 000 series in the implementation guides. Now, let me quickly explain the difference that we have between the standards and the guides. So the standards are mandatory in nature. The literature and text of standard which is written in this book of the standard are mandatory in nature. A professional who's discharging his attest function, as we call, has to ensure that he complies to all the standard. And if he does not, the fact has to be disclosed as to why he does not complies to the standard. And of course, the other repercussions which come with those. Okay. So the standard is mandatory. Now the implementation guide. Why the implementation guide? The implementation guides are recommendatory in nature and they will assist the user to understand the contents of the standard and will help the professional to implement the standard. Considering the variety in the nature of engagement, considering the variety in the nature of the forensic engagement, it is very difficult to codify a particular set of procedures which should be applied to all sort of forensic engagement. Now, in order to overcome this, the standards are written on principle basis. So we call them principle-based standard. If you will see the literature of the standard, I don't think any standard exceeds more than 5 pages. In a book of size this, no standard exceeds more than 5 pages. So these are all principle-based standard. These are all what if, what will happen, what is to be done. They don't explain the how. How it is to be done, that is explained in the implementation guide. So the how is explained in the implementation guide and the what is explained in the standards. Okay. Now, coming to the overarching documents. These are 3 set of documents which we have. The first is preface, second is framework, and third is the basic principles. Out of these, now that the standards have become mandatory, the basic principles are most important because these basic principles are to be followed throughout the engagement, and all the standards are to be read with in conjunction with the preface, framework, and the basic principles. Now, what do we have? The part of the preface. What do we have? The part of the preface, or rather, the preface will have introduction to the standards. The preface will have requirement, need, and introduction to the standard. The preface also has the process as to how the standards have been set. So first there was a study group, then it came to DAB, then it went to the council. Before that, there was exposure draft. Of course, I'm not talking about the multiple vetting that have been done at multiple levels. So there's a review committee, there's a legal committee, it has gone for legal vetting, and all these processes have been followed before publishing the standard. So the preface contains basically the process of issuance of the standards. Then comes the framework. Now, the framework explains certain key terms. It has definitions of certain key terms which are used throughout the standards. So the meaning of forensic accounting, engagement, litigation, investigation, professional, these terminologies are explained in the framework, and it establishes a context of what is coming in the standards. So each standard is divided into 6 parts. We'll see that in a later slide. Again, the basic principles. Now we have 10 basic principles in these set of standards. The 10 basic principles are bifurcated further into 2 parts, where 5 basic principles are for the attribute of the professional. What should be the conduct, thought process, and behavior of the professional. The other 5 principles are conduct principles, which are dependent for the engagement as to what should be the engagement, how the engagement should be proceeded with. Now, as I discussed, the preface explains the nature, that is mandate. As we said, these standards are mandatory to all ICAI members. After 1st of July, these standards are mandatory to all ICAI members who are engaged in forensic accounting and investigation engagement. Now, you would notice that under the introduction and scope para of each standard, the limitation is already included in the scope itself. So anything which is excluded from that particular standard is made clear in the very beginning in the introduction and scope para of the standard itself. As discussed, the implementation guide is always recommendatory. So the question of what is answered, what is expected, that is answered by the standards. The question of how, that is answered by the implementation guide. Now, we have few questions that whether the standard will be applicable for members, whether the standard will be applicable for other professionals. Of course, non-chartered accountant, the answer is no. Anything which is mandated by the institute is applicable only to the chartered accountant professionals and chartered accountant members. That is the mandate in the CA Act. Now, whether others will use it, yes, that of course is a thought process that others will be using this, and law enforcement agencies, competent authorities, courts, adjudicators, eventually they will be insisting that any engagement which is being conducted, they may follow the standard. That is, of course, a thought process that we have, that in future date, courts may insist and law enforcement agencies may insist that whosoever conducts the engagement, they may choose to apply these standards. That is an expectation. This is the standard setting methodology, which we have already discussed. And I understand, let us spend more time on the standard. So it is typically formation of study group, review of the draft by DAB, exposure draft open for 30 days, finalization submission to council, and then council approves the FAIS. Now, as we said, the framework of the forensic accounting compendium, the framework para in the overarching document, the framework part in the overarching document, that discusses a couple of things. If you'll see, there's a beautiful graphics on our left-hand side. We have the pillars. We have the definition, which is the roof of the house. We have the pillars as basic principles, key concept, standards, and the implementation guide. These are the pillars of the engagement, and everything rests on the code of ethics. It is amply made clear that the code of ethics applicable for the chartered accountants as approved by the council applies in these engagement as well. So it is ensured, it has to be ensured by the professional that whatsoever he does, everything complies to the code of ethics. Okay. Now, as I was telling, that we have certain definition, key definition in the framework. So the key definition, these key definitions are also explained in FAIS 110, but then the key definition which are used throughout the standard, they have been explained in the framework and the definition part for ease of use to the professional. So the two key definitions which we would like to understand is forensic accounting, investigation. So what do we understand by forensic accounting? I hope by now the institute is in process of disseminating this knowledge at a very large level, and by now a lot of people understand what is the mandate and what is the expectation from the forensic accountant. So typically, the word forensic has been taken from the Latin word forensis, meaning acceptable before forum. The definition here also tries to bring out the same essence, that is, forensic accounting is gathering and evaluation of evidence by a professional to interpret and report the findings before a competent authority. So the key words, if you see here, it is gathering and evaluating evidence, and to report the findings before a competent authority. Okay, and to report the finding before a competent authority. Now, if we look at the definition of investigation is a systematic and critical examination of fact, record, document, for specific purpose. Okay, for specific purpose. Now, I see that we have few questions as well. I will try answering those questions as and when we discuss them. So, are the standard in line with the requirement of Indian Evidence Act? What is the need of the standard if they are compliant with the Evidence Act, which will anyway take precedence? Investigation requires creativity on part of the investigators, and restriction by way of legal requirement and standards curb this creativity. Now, to answer this question, the standards, it is ensured that the standards are not in contravention with any act of the country, because these standards are issued by the institute, and no standards, in fact, no law can be contrary to other law. Otherwise, there has to be a supremacy which has to be created. So these standards are not in contravention with any law. I would not use the word that these standards are in line with the Evidence Act, because the Evidence Act is way, way, way beyond these standards. The Evidence Act is a very detailed document. The Evidence Act has a lot of facets, and we, as chartered accountants, are not trained, rather we don't have a formal education of the Evidence Act. So it has been tried to keep it simple to the extent that it is required. In fact, if you'll notice, we have ensured that everywhere our role ends by gathering of the evidence. We are not assessing the quality of the evidence. We are not assessing the culpability of the person. Our role is gathering of the evidence. Okay, so this is not particularly, we cannot say it is in line with the Evidence Act, but yes, let me put it very strongly that nothing in the standard is contrary to the Evidence Act. Coming to the question of curbing of creativity and creating a legal restriction, please understand, investigation is an art and the standards don't intend to curb the creativity. Once we go to the application part, once we go to the actual working and conduct, you'll notice that the standards are open enough and they have given enough room to apply creativity. These standards don't intend to put a restriction. However, the idea is that whenever you are raised a question as to whether you have done this activity or whether you have done that activity, considering the diverse nature of the engagement, whether you have done this, whether you have done that, in a situation like this, the professional will have a fallback mechanism. The professional will have a fallback mechanism that these are the requirements as prescribed by the standards, and we have fulfilled these requirements. Okay, so that is to answer the question. There's also a question as to what is the difference in the method of conducting forensic audit with the method of conducting internal audit. First of all, let us go further and discuss that this practice is not called as forensic audit. Okay, this is called as forensic accounting. Let us not confuse and use the word forensic audit. Okay, let us not confuse and use the word forensic audit. Let us discuss that. Let us discuss that as we move further, that this practice, if you will notice, the entire literature of standard and implementation guide nowhere uses the word forensic audit. In fact, the presentation, if I may, let me pull the requisite slides. The presentation, we had a slide where the presentation categorically states that this will not be called as a forensic audit assignment. Okay, forensic audit is a misnomer. Forensic audit is a misnomer. We will not be calling this as a forensic audit. This is a forensic accounting engagement. Now, why the word accounting and not forensic audit? Forensic audit is something which gives assurance. Audit is something which gives assurance. Our standard 110 is also very clear in explaining the meaning of forensic audit, forensic accounting, investigation, and litigation support. Okay, so while in audit, it is the opinion of the auditor to give true and fair view. In a forensic engagement, he or she, the professional, is a fact-finding authority. Okay, a fact-finding person. He is not supposed to give opinion. In fact, one of our basic principles says separating facts from opinion. Our report as issued under the forensic engagement is a report of fact, and it should not be colored with the opinion of the professional. Okay. Now, having said this, there's also a thought process that, accounting is a larger terminology when we compare with the word audit. Audit is a subset of accounting. Ironically, in a country like India, accounting has become synonymous with bookkeeping. But please understand, the word audit is part of the accounting discipline. And when we say the word accounting, it includes auditing as well. I hope all our members will appreciate that even our qualification that we have is chartered accountant, and it's not chartered auditor, though we do all the auditing. So accounting is a broader word. Accounting includes auditing. Audit is for assurance function. And globally, this practice is called as forensic accounting practice. That is why we use the word forensic accounting and we don't use the word forensic audit. In fact, I would request and encourage all the members to educate the general public not to use the word forensic audit. We want to go with forensic accounting only and not forensic audit. Now, coming to the structure of the standard, So each standard is divided into 6 parts. The first part is introduction and scope. And this is the structure across all the standards. Even the guidance note has a fixed structure where we have examples, illustrations, procedures, introduction. Okay. But then let us talk about the standards, and I'm not focusing a lot on the implementation guide. Probably we can have sessions standard by standard where we can include one standard and implementation guide, but that is for a later date. So the first section that we have is introduction and scope. Okay. This section, it gives brief background and scope of the standard. As I said, this section clearly presents if something is too obvious and is excluded from this. So if a standard says that this standard does not apply to a particular activity, that is very much included in the scope para. So all exclusions are given in the scope para itself. Okay. Next we have objective. Now, the objective para gives the purpose of issuance of the standard and the need as to why this standard is required, why this standard is important. Okay. This requirement, this marriage of requirement, we have the objective as to what is the objective, what should be accomplished by this. This objective is given in the next section, which is the requirement as to if a desired outcome, if something is desired, what is required to be done to achieve the objective. That is the part of the requirement standard. What I'm telling, not how. How again goes to the implementation guide. Now, there are certain paragraphs in the requirement which merit detailed discussion. Certain paragraph in the requirements which cannot be explained in few sentences in the requirement para. So those paragraphs are explained in detail in the explanatory comments. So those paragraphs which require detailed elaboration and deliberation, they are discussed in the explanatory comments. The 5th paragraph that we have, it's a very interesting paragraph which has been introduced in the forensic standards, and this is something which is going to help all the professionals immensely. This paragraph is called as documentation of work procedure. Now, what does this mean? This simply means as to what are the documents that a professional is expected to maintain, to have in his record as working papers, so that the professional can demonstrate that he has complied, he has the conformance to the standards. Okay, so the idea is that this para will give a list of documents which has to be maintained by the professional to demonstrate conformance to the standard. Once you have that list, once you show that list to a concerned authority, you can prove that you have followed the due process as required in the standard. The last para is effective date. Each standard has the effective date. This was given to cover a situation if all the standards were not mandated simultaneously. But then for us, we are very happy that all the standards are applicable simultaneously. So it is the last para, effective date. This is by and large not very relevant in this context. Okay. Now, let us come to the basic principle. Why I am discussing the overarching documents in detail and why I am spending a lot of time. I'm spending a lot of time and I am discussing this in detail is because the basic principle, the overarching document, that is the structure, the basic principle, these are common throughout all the standards. Okay. So these are common throughout all the standards. Now, if these are common throughout all the standards, then we need to understand this in detail. That is why I'm spending a lot of time. So I have a question which says that if an auditor reports fraud to NAFRA and if the person named in the fraud were to sue the auditor, or the same becomes part of legal proceeding, if the auditor is not a forensic auditor, what is the protection to the auditor? Does a report needs to be prepared in line with Indian Evidence Act before notifying NAFRA, or is he trained to be expert witness to face cross-examination lawyer? So it's a long question. It's difficult to comprehend. I'll just explain the essence. So whosoever has asked this question, the idea put forth is that if an auditor reports fraud to NAFRA, and if the person in the fraud would sue the auditor, if the auditor is not forensic auditor, what is the protection to the auditor? While I am reading the question, I really don't think that this question is connected with the forensic engagement. This is a question altogether at a different platform, and it can be answered at a different level. I really don't think that this is relevant answering here to face cross-examination with lawyer. I mean, cross-examination is a skill which is very much required for a forensic engagement. But then if someone is being sued, I really don't know the merits of why he's sued, what he's sued. And these standards are not created to protect a person when he's sued for his assurance engagement, as it is amply and clearly clarified that these standards are not applicable in an assurance engagement. These standards are only applicable in a forensic accounting and investigative engagement. Okay, so I hope this answers the question. Now, let us discuss the basic principles. As I said, I'll be spending some time in discussing the basic principles as well. So let us discuss the basic principles. And mind you, it is these basic principles which have to be kept in mind throughout the engagement and throughout reading all the standards. These basic principles are as basic and these are as strong principles that these will be applied to all the engagement, to all the standards, okay, to all the standards. So all the standards have to be read with in conjunction with this basic principle. In places where it is required and where it is essential, attempt has been made to elaborate also in the standard. Okay, now let us come to the first basic principle. And as I said earlier, the 5 basic principles are on the attributes of the professional, that is, they help to establish the credibility of the professional, and 5 basic principles are for the performance, that is, they establish the credibility of the engagement. Now, coming to the first basic principle, independence. Independence is not as such a new basic principle for chartered accountant. Independence is essential in the assurance engagement as well. And this concept becomes altogether more relevant here, because here it should be remembered that this is a dispute resolution process, and in a lot of situations, when you issue a report, that report will be used to either raise a dispute or resolve a dispute. So in all probability, the report may become a part of the dispute. So independence is very important. Independence has to be amply demonstrated, and neutrality in mind, neutrality in action, no influence of any of the party has to be categorically displayed in a forensic engagement. Okay. The next basic principle that we have is integrity and objectivity. Again, both these characteristics are not new to professionals. So integrity is integrity of mind, integrity in action. There should not be any conflict of interest. There should not be any conflict of interest. In fact, the guidance note has given certain situations which clearly demonstrate conflict of interest. So enough care should be taken that conflict of interest doesn't arise. At the same time, objectivity. What do we mean by objectivity? Objectivity is that when two professionals come to a conclusion, their conclusion should by and large be similar, because they are based on similar set of facts. It should not be subjective. It should not be opinionated. It should be objective. Okay. The next basic principle that we have is due professional care. Now, due professional care, as we have, due professional care is again not a new attribute. It is applicable in all other engagements that chartered accountants do. So, due professional care, simply put, says that reasonable care should be taken by the professional, adequate attention should be given by the professional, certain rights. So, the professional should be cautious. The professional should be cautious while doing that, and he should exercise his best skill. That is covered in due professional care. Of course, conformance to professional standard is a requirement in due professional care. Now, the fourth basic principle that we have is confidentiality. Confidentiality is altogether more important in a forensic engagement. It is noticed many times, particularly for a practitioner like me, where most of our work come from prosecution, from law enforcement agency. Their confidentiality becomes of utmost importance. So we have to be very cautious about privacy. We have to be very cautious as to whom should we disclose, whom should we not disclose. These things become very critical. Confidentiality becomes very critical. This, I would also like to extend that the IT assets in a firm where the professional is practicing in this domain has to be robust so that there should not be any data leakage, there should not be any data breach, and enough caution should be exercised to maintain the confidentiality of the client. The last attribute that we have for the professional is skill and competence. Please understand that most of the engagement that we do is dependent on multi-dimension, is dependent on multi-discipline and multi-dimension. So there's no engagement that you do which does not involve law. Whereas we say that we are not, I mean, it is the truth. We claim that we are not experts in the Evidence Act. We are not expert in the Criminal Procedure Code. We are not expert in the Indian Penal Code. A basic understanding of the Evidence Act, a basic understanding of the Information Technology Act, something like a certificate under Section 65B, which is part of the Evidence Act. These things at bare minimum are important for the professional to know. Okay, so the professional has to have appropriate skill and enough competence to do the engagement, to complete the case. That is meant by skill and competence. Let us come to the next basic principle, contextualization of situation. Now, what do we understand by the contextualization of situation principle? See, I'll tell you, in any engagement, it is the whole picture which has to be seen and not simply an isolated transaction. So the guidance note has a beautiful example. Say if you are investigating a procurement fraud case, you are investigating a procurement fraud that during one particular time, pumps were purchased by the company, or pumps were purchased by the authority, and these pumps are purchased at an exaggerated price. Say the professional is investigating a situation where pumps are purchased by the authority and these pumps are purchased at an exaggerated price. Now, simply put, these transactions may look colored or fraudulent or mischievous. But if we understand the context that there was a flooding in the area, there was flooding in the company, or there was flooding in the building, the pumps were required on an urgent basis. It was a Saturday afternoon where most of the shops were closing or about to close. Tomorrow was Sunday, you would not have got the pump. And in a situation like this, the pumps were ordered. Now, this transaction has to be seen in light of the context and not in an isolated manner. An emergency situation, say COVID was the best example. Most of the hospitals, they bypass their regular purchase process and they have procured in an emergency situation. Now, in a situation like this, how do you justify the price? So this is meant by contextualization of situation. Next, we have something called as primacy of truth. In a forensic engagement, the professional is a truth seeker. The professional is a truth seeker. His duty is to find the truth and to bring forth the truth. In fact, I would take the liberty of having the statement which we have, Satyamev Jayate, as the part of our national emblem, that truth always triumphs. That is the objective in any forensic engagement, because we are investigators. Our job is to find and present the truth. Okay. Next, we have respecting rights and obligation. Now, the simple principle of audi alteram partem, that is, the other side should be heard, the principle of natural justice, to know the other side of the story and to respect the rights of both the disputing party, irrespective of whosoever engages you. That is a very important trait in a forensic professional, which has to be demonstrated while conduct of the engagement. The reason is that if the adjudicating authority, if the competent authority, or if the judge notices that there is an iota of biasness in the report, then the report will be tossed away and it will not be used as part of evidence. Okay, so respecting facts and obligation is an important principle. Yes, friends, I am spending a lot of time on the basic principle because I consider these basic principles are the lifeblood of these standards, because this is something which has to be hammered in our mind again and again while applying any standard to an engagement. The ninth one, we have separating facts from opinion. As I said, the professional is a truth seeker. It is expected that he gives statement of the fact and not the opinion. In fact, the standard clearly and categorically mentions the implementation guide reiterates the fact that a professional is not supposed to give a statement of guilt or innocence. Somebody is guilty, somebody is innocent. That is not a statement which the professional is supposed to give. This is the job of the court. The professional's role ends simply by presenting the facts. It should not be colored with opinion. Sometimes we make such mistakes unknowingly, and sometimes these are made knowingly. It should be ensured that facts are separate from the opinion. Quality and continuous improvement, as the name suggests, this principle encourages the professional to strive for continuous improvement and to maintain the quality. We also have the 600 series standard, which is on the quality, which though we don't have a full-fledged peer review mechanism for forensics, but for forensic engagement, but the standard dwells upon how to have a principle of continuous quality enhancement. Okay, so that is about the basic principles. Please understand, as the cost of repetition, I am telling again and again that these basic principles are very important, because whatsoever standard you apply, whatsoever implementation guide you use, you have to read that in conjunction with the standards. Now, let us come to the 100 series of the standard. So the 100 series of the standard is on the key concepts. What is the key principles? That is the 100 series of the standards. So the 100 series has 4 standards. First being nature of engagement. As we discussed earlier, this standard divides the nature of engagement into 3 parts. Okay, this standard divides the nature of engagement into 3 parts. The first nature of engagement is called as forensic accounting engagement. The next one is investigation, and the third one is litigation support. Okay, so we have 3 types of engagement which is given by these standards. First being forensic accounting, next being investigation, and third being litigation support. Now, what is meant by forensic accounting? What is meant by forensic accounting? What is meant by investigation? And what is meant by litigation support? That we will be discussing. So, here, the difference between forensic accounting and investigation is more like, if we want to put an analogy, of course, this is not a perfect analogy, but then for the purpose of understanding, I am telling that difference is like financial standards, financial investigation and operative investigation. So in case of forensic accounting, it is usage of accounting skills. Okay. It is usage of accounting skill for the engagement. Okay. We have examples: financial statement manipulation, fund diversion or asset tracing, anti-money laundering. Okay. These are particularly the forensic accounting services. Okay. These are given in standard 110, para 4.2, and the nature of services is given in 210, standard 210, annexure 1. We have given a list. Even the implementation guide has a long list as to what type of service will qualify in forensic accounting, what type of service will qualify in investigation. So we said usage of accounting skill. Forensic accounting aims to highlight any accounting or legal violation, regulatory deviation, contractual breach. The focus area is critical examination of transaction, fund balances with books of accounts. Whereas investigation is a broader term and it can include a lot of things. Say insurance claims, ethical code of conduct violation, whistleblower complaints, asset theft, bribery, corruption. Now, though at the end they do use some sort of accounting skills, but they are not forensic accounting engagement in nature. So the purpose of the investigation is to examine the facts and circumstances, gather the evidence, and to prove or disprove the hypothesis. Now, what is this hypothesis? This we'll be understanding when we discuss the 140, standard number 140. Okay. The third area which we have, as we said, we have three areas. The third area which we have is called as litigation support service. Now, what do we understand by litigation support service? Litigation support service is typically a job of a paralegal where the paralegal helps to gather, discover, present the evidences in a court of law. Now, there are a lot of engagement which stem out of court of law's decision. So if the professional has to give a testimony before the competent authority based on the forensic accounting expertise, or if the professional has to help someone for resolution of legal dispute, the matter is already under adjudication. If he has to provide testimony, then such services fall under the litigation support service. Okay. Let us come to the next standard, 120, fraud risk. I hope you all are with me. I understand a virtual session becomes a little bit difficult because the speaker has to constantly speak, and we speak by and large on the subject. In physical sessions, we do have an advantage of taking the liberty and discussing something more than the subject. But here, because the audience is all virtual, you don't get to see the faces. You really don't know how these sessions are being taken and how people are reacting. So that is a disadvantage. Of course, the advantage far outweigh and exceed the disadvantage of virtual session. People in every nook and corner can listen to us. They can ask questions. Probably this would be recorded. It would be shared. So the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages. Yes. Now, the next standard, as we discuss, fraud risk. What do we mean by fraud risk? So not all transactions, not all, facets of the fraud are equally important. So what is the purpose of this standard? This standard says that fraud indicators, and mind you, beautiful set of fraud indicators are given in the implementation guide. A detailed list is given in the implementation guide where the fraud indicators are explained, that all the fraud indicators needs to be understood to prioritize the work. As I said, you have to start with a plan, you have to start with a thought process. So you'll do basic risk assessment and identification to prioritize your work as to which should be done first, how much resource should be allocated on something, and whether at all you should accept the work or not. So there is reputational risk involved, there is risk of bad name, there is risk of receipt of remuneration. If the company is going bust, if the company is going bankrupt, who assures the remuneration? All these risks needs to be assessed by this standard. At this juncture, I would also like to say that there is ample research which has said that fraud is always hidden. So fraud is intentional. At the same time, efforts are put in to conceal the fraud by the fraudster. So the fraudster puts a lot of effort to hide the fraud. Now, when I say this, our audit procedures, our audit that we do, they are not the traditional audit assurance which I'm talking about. The audit procedures are not designed to find frauds, because fraud is deliberate and intentional. So unless and until someone points out that this particular area may be susceptible to fraud or there is a fraud ongoing, it's very difficult to detect a fraud merely by applying our typical audit procedures. Again, we do have something sampling, because most of our audits are based on sampling. Now, sampling technique, the technique of sampling, if applied in a forensic engagement, it will not be giving the desired result. So it is said that the technique of sampling doesn't directly applies in a forensic engagement, and entire transactions have to be reviewed. Yes, there are ways and means of doing smart sampling, but then that is the part of the implementation guide which has to be read with, and we can discuss that in detail some other day. Okay, so the fraud risk has to be determined. Here, the fraud triangle, as we know, that is the pressure or the motive to commit the fraud, the opportunity as to what is the opportunity available to do the fraud, and the rationalization, the thought process of the person when he committed the fraud. These help to bind the reasons or to understand the fraud indicators in detail. Okay, so this was about our standard on the fraud risk assessment. Okay, now let us go to the next standard. This standard is called as the laws and regulation. Now, it's a very nice standard which divides the engagement into parts. Now, this standard says that any engagement may come out of either in accordance with the law, or there are certain direct impact law which are applicable for all engagement. So, simply put out, or let me use an example to understand. The appointment which is made under the insolvency and the bankruptcy code for transaction review, the appointment that is made under insolvency or bankruptcy code for transaction review is in accordance with the specific law. Okay, it is in the assignment with the so it is an engagement specific law. There are also professionals who are appointed under different act under different set of regulations. Say if you have been appointed under, if you have appointed to verify or check or scrutinize the grants, this grant has been given under a central government scheme. Okay, probably Manrega as we call it in India, or probably the health grant as we have the Government of India's health grant as we call National Health Mission. So if you are appointed to check the grants, then this has to be done in accordance with the law for the specific engagement. And then we have something called as the direct impact law. Now, what do we understand by direct impact law? Direct impact law are certain law and certain regulations which are applicable to the professional irrespective of the engagement. Okay. So example of that we can understand with the Evidence Act, the Indian Evidence Act. Now, the Indian Evidence Act 1872 is by and large applicable to most of the engagements. Similarly, we have the Information Technology Act. Now, any engagement that you do that will involve computers, it will involve systems, it will involve extracting data out of mobile phones. The moment you do these activity, the moment you deploy some techniques to do this, it happens under the aegis of the Information Technology Act, read with the Indian Evidence Act. So if you take some data from some system, it has to comply to those direct impact laws. So it can be engagement specific law and it can be direct impact law. Direct impact is applicable to all the engagement. Engagement specific is applicable to that particular engagement only. So if the appointment is not dependent on an engagement specific law, then it is covered by the Contract Act because it is under a contractual agreement with the client and the professional. Okay. So this is law and regulation. Now, again, if we look at the implementation guide has explained the definition of fraud as per the IPC. It has explained the definition of law as per the Companies Act, and the implementation guide has given a detailed list. The implementation guide has given a detailed list of the possible sections of the direct impact law which may be applicable in most of the forensic engagement. So acts like the Indian Penal Code, the Indian Evidence Act, Prevention of Money Laundering Act, Information Technology Act, Prevention of Corruption Act, Arbitration and Reconciliation Act, Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, Indian Contract Act, Negotiable Instrument Act. There are almost, the list is almost of 21 acts with relevant sections which are given in the implementation guide. It is expected that a professional at bare minimum is aware of these sections of the relevant act which when he is investigating. So probably if you are engaged, say by a law enforcement agency, where your job is to find the money trail, you need to understand as to how you can gather the evidence, whether you have gathered the evidence would be admissible or not, because the expectation of the agency would be that the evidence that you gather should ultimately be capable of being used in a court of law. Again, as we say, the standards have been futuristic and they clearly and categorically, explicitly say that principle of natural justice should be given due importance. The principle of natural justice has been in a lot of talk after the recent Supreme Court decision, wherein the Supreme Court has said, Honorable Court has said that the borrower has to be given an opportunity before he is declared as willful defaulter. There's a lot of hue and cry and debate going on for that. But the court has just tried to emphasize the principle of natural justice, that one party cannot unilaterally unilaterally declare somebody as fraudulent. Okay. Now, let us come to the next set of standard, which is 140, applying hypothesis. Now, for a lot of people, this standard may be abstract and new, but please understand this is core or heart of a forensic engagement. What do we understand by hypothesis? So hypothesis, the concept of hypothesis is that when the professional starts the engagement, he starts with a provisional or unproven theory, a conjuncture, a thought process that this may have happened. How, what, why, where, when, certain assumptions for these questions. And it is these questions, it is these hypotheses, it is these questions which has to be validated, which has to be checked, and evidence has to be discovered. Okay. So evidence has to be discovered for these questions, and these evidence, when gathered, when discovered, when presented, these evidence should come out in the report. So gathering of evidence is important. I'm sorry to use evidence gathering and evidence discovery in the same breath. Our role is gathering of evidence, and evidence discovery becomes a very broad term. Okay. So our role is gathering of evidence. As I said, the hypothesis created should be broad, flexible, so that new idea can come. And this hypothesis helps the professional to come to the conclusion of the modus operandi, of the amount involved. It probably, the purpose is to either prove, not prove, rather prove, disprove, or not prove the hypothesis or the theory which is formulated. At this juncture, it is also important to understand the biases. So while framing the hypothesis, the knowledge of biases is also important. So something like authority bias, where a person tries to convince his superior authority. Then we have something like confirmation bias, where the person is inclined to confirm whatever he already has, or rather whatever he knows. Okay. Then we have availability bias. The person tries to confirm based on what is available. Okay. Then he should not be selective, and it should not be based on perceptions. These biases, my personal belief and my personal perceptions, should not play a role in the investigation. I have to be objective. That is why I say we have to go to the basic principle always. I have to be objective. Okay. Now, coming to the 200 series. The 200 series, very quickly, I'll try to finish. If I'll just request the moderator or the technical person, whosoever is there, that if we have questions, please keep on posting. I tried to answer 4 or 5 of them which were posted. If you have more questions, please take a pause and put the question so I can discuss them while I'm doing, because it's already 7:15. I see my other colleague also here. So in the next 10-15 minutes, I'll explain these 4 or 5 standards. These are engagement management standards. So the engagement management standards are mostly on how to manage the engagement. So it starts with objective, to understand the objective as to whether the objective of the engagement comes into forensic accounting, investigation, or litigation. Then the next we have engagement acceptance and appointment. How to accept the engagement. We have to have an engagement letter. In case of law enforcement, we have to have an appointment. 230 is using work of an expert. In most of the cases, it is noticed that the professional alone cannot provide an opinion. So he has to use work of an expert. Next, we have engaging with agencies. A lot of cases come from law enforcement agencies. For people like us, 90% of forensic business comes from, rather 80% of the forensic business, volume-wise, not value-wise. Volume-wise come from the law enforcement agencies. So it is altogether a different ballgame to work with the agencies. They have their own style, mannerism, protocol, type, pressure, expectation. So this standard tries to cover the engagement with the agencies. And last standard in the series is communication with the stakeholder. Now, let us quickly dive into this, whatever we have, these standard. So the first one is engagement objective. So it is requirement of the professional to understand the purpose of the engagement, because the purpose of the engagement will determine everything. What is expected from the engagement? The scope has to be defined, it has to be clear, and it has to be in line with the objective. At the same time, it has to be amply made clear what is excluded from the scope. Of course, this clarity has to come only if there is an overlapping or cross function, then this has to be told. Okay, otherwise it's not required. It's also clear, it's also amply clarified that the engagement should not be started keeping an objective outcome in mind. That is, I will be doing this engagement and this will be the outcome. The professional cannot commit to a particular outcome. The professional cannot commit to a particular outcome before even starting the engagement. So I cannot take a plea that I am doing this engagement to prove that person as fraudulent or to prove that person as a thief. That should not be the purpose of the engagement, because you are determining the outcome before even you have started. Okay. So the engagement objectives are to be clearly defined. As we have discussed earlier, this is the three parts where the engagement is bifurcated into. So we have something forensic accounting, which is usage of accounting skill, deviations, accounting transactions, violation like financial statement, fraud diversion, asset tracing, investigative service, that is whistleblower, asset and bribery, fraud cyber frauds, and then I'm sorry, we have litigation service. I'm speaking constantly. So litigation support service. In litigation support service, we have alternate dispute resolution and testimony before competing authority. Okay, let us move ahead. Engagement, acceptance, and appointment. This is again something which we do for our assurance engagement. A key element which is included here is preliminary procedure and basic due diligence. What do we understand by this? So, most of the engagements which come in the forensic accounting investigation domain, they come with a degree of sensitivity and degree of risk. Now, it is the purpose of the professional to understand that sensitivity, to understand that risk by applying certain preliminary procedure and doing his due diligence. Whether he is not being trapped into something to which he should not commit, whether there is certain inherent risk, in doing an engagement like this. We have seen that professionals face threat to life and threat to personal liberty and safety in engagement like this. So all these things should be covered in the engagement, acceptance, and appointment phase. The standard explains that basic due diligence is needed. The professional should identify the key stakeholders, the individuals who are covered, who will be using the report, what will be the repercussion of that. All these things have to be understood before accepting the engagement and appointment. Now, whereas you'll notice that the word used are engagement, acceptance, and appointment. The appointment word specifically refers in case of government agencies or law enforcement agencies where there's no formal exchange of engagement letter. They just give a work order or an appointment letter, and the entire engagement is dependent on that. Now, at this juncture, let me clarify the difference between engagement and assignment. The entire work that we have got, will be called as engagement. And each portion of the work, say if the engagement can be bifurcated into 5 parts, each part will constitute as an assignment. So the nomenclature used is engagement and assignment. Engagement is the complete work. Assignment is part of the engagement, parts of those work. If you'll notice, 300 series uses the word assignment, others uses the word engagement. Okay, because that is the work done series. Okay, how the work is to be done, how review is to be done, how supervision is to be done. Now, let us quickly come to using the work of an expert. Now, as we discussed, in most of the cases, the professional may not have the technical competence to do all the job. Say if you require somebody from the chemical engineering department, if you require somebody as a lawyer, if you require somebody as a valuer in determining. So the professional should always seek assistance of the expert if he wants to give a fair, correct, and meticulous report. Okay. This standard explains as to how to use the work of an expert. So it starts simply by guiding as to how to hire the expert. So you make independent determination, you understand the market reference, you engage the expert. It may so happen that the professional has not, but his client has engaged the expert. So in that case, that fact has to be mentioned. The reasoning of having the expert has to be mentioned in the report. And it goes without saying, the conclusion or the report of the expert has to be mentioned in the report. If the professional chooses not to include the work of the expert, then the reasons for not including the work of the expert should also be explained as a best practice. So qualification, credentials, market ref, conflict, all these things are very basic, which the professional should check before appointing an expert. Okay. It's also very important to maintain the working papers. So typically, the expert may want to retain his working procedures by himself. It's ideal if the professional has a copy of the working procedure or the original, whatsoever is possible. If not, the professional should have an agreement with the expert so that his working papers can be called for whenever required for production in court of law. But it is clarified here that the ultimate responsibility for the engagement lies with the professional and not the expert. Okay, it is the professional who's signing the report. So the ultimate responsibility is on the professional and not on the expert. Okay, we come to 200 series 240, engaging with agencies. Now, as I said, when we say agencies, we include law enforcement agencies, like we have the CBI, Enforcement Directorate, Economic Offence Wing, and we have regulatory body like SEBI, IRDA, RBI. Such bodies are called as agencies. Please understand, courts are not included in this standard. They are included in testifying before the courts. Okay. But then if the court appoints the investigation work, probably all these standards have to be kept in mind. Now, a lot of work is done for the agencies, where the agencies appoint the professional. Here, scope, objective, procedures are altogether more important because the agencies have, as I said, their own mannerism, nature, work, mandate. Of course, the act under which such agency is constituted, the objective of the agency, it is very important to understand the reason. Independence, integrity, objectivity, and confidentiality, they become altogether more important because public interest is involved, huge amount of money is involved. So the responsibility cast on the professional becomes very large. The concept of due professional care becomes altogether more important in a situation like this. So the professional should take appropriate care when he is engaged by the agency. The standard explains all these facts. This is the list of the agencies and the regulatory bodies which you can refer. Now, we come to 250, the last standard in the 200 series, and probably this is the last standard that I am discussing, because the next part will be taken by my co-speaker Uday Bhai. So let us quickly discuss this and we close. So we have communication with stakeholder. This is the FAIS 250. This standard identifies two classes of stakeholder. The primary stakeholder, one who appoints the professional. The other stakeholder, all other than primary stakeholder, are covered under other stakeholder. Now, the standard clearly distinguishes and establishes a responsibility on the professional to communicate with the primary stakeholders directly, without any medium or without any person in between. Now, why do we need to communicate with other stakeholders? The standard also guides, and it says that in order to execute the function efficiently, the professional may have to talk to other stakeholders. He may have to communicate with the other stakeholders. What is the communication? How the communication is to be done? This is also part of the standard. So the communication protocol, who should be contacted, when should be contacted, how should be contacted, where he should be contacted, all these protocols should be defined in the engagement letter by virtue of this standard. What information can be disseminated, what information cannot be disseminated, that broad idea should also be there. This standard again classifies the content into two parts. As the content as in what should be communicated. The content is classified into two parts, something called as essential matters and something called as significant matters. Now, what do we mean by essential matters and significant matters? And we have a long list, indicative list of essential matters and significant matters to guide the professional. Essential matters are something which the professional has to communicate, whereas significant matters are matters which the professional may communicate depending on the situation. He will exercise his best judgment. Okay. The standard amply clarifies that media discussion, public discussion, appearing on a talk show for particular case, all these things should be avoided by the professional. So it's not prohibited, but it should be avoided. It should be avoided to imbibe a sense of neutrality and to show objectivity. Okay. We have examples of essential matters and significant matters. So something which endangers the execution of the engagement, something like the scope and the methodology, the law and the regulation, something which you cannot move forward without communicating, those will come under essential matters. But the professional may choose based on his professional judgment as to whether lack of cooperation. How do you define lack of cooperation? Whether the delay is being because of the professional or because of the client or because of the other stakeholder not providing the information. Probably there may be a conflict of interest. The chain of custody, the professional is very sure that if I gather this evidence, the chain of custody will be broken. Such situation will come under significant matter and the professional shall communicate that as a significant matter. With this, we complete the 200 series, and probably I see our next speaker, CA Uday Kulkarni, has started his video. Probably he is not in the frame. Uday bhai, if you can adjust your camera, or you can sit on the other side because you're not in the frame.
Yeah, actually, Durgesh, right? it's a bit difficult because it is having some remote connections to be done. So I probably will switch off the cameras.
It's okay. I mean, so this was my portion. The next section will be discussed by our next panelist, Uday Kulkarni. And I don't know if we have the host. I don't see more
Sir,
questions in the chat box.
thank you very much, Durgesh sir.
Kunal, over to you.
We
Thank you.
don't have any more questions. Thank you very much for taking time from your busy schedule, and the session was wonderful. And thank you for being an important pillar of the group which has developed forensic accounting and investigation standards, sir. Hope to see you soon, sir, for the next initiatives of DAP.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now I like to introduce our next faculty, CA Uday Kulkarni ji, who is a practicing chartered accountant with more than 25 years of experience. He is a certified internal auditor. He is a certified information system auditor from CISA. He is also an qualified insolvency professional. He has completed digital forensic course. His focus area are information system audit, cyber security, forensic audit, and IBC advisory. Now I request CA Uday Kulkarni ji to take over the session. Thank you.
Yeah. Good evening, all the participants. As I tried to share my cameras, but due to some technical reasons, as it is remotely getting handled, I'm not right now able to share my video, but I definitely share the PPTs, and I hope you are getting my good quality audio. Is it? Okay. So I hope the PPTs are visible. Yeah, and I'm trying.
Yes, sir, it is visible, sir. Visible.
Yeah, just I'm trying to zoom it out. Yeah, just a minute. I'm just adjusting the zoom part of that. Yeah, that's not getting, just a minute. Okay. Yeah, but it is starting from beginning, na? Yeah, but we have to start from the 300 series. So I'm coming to that. Just a minute. Yeah, I think now it's okay. Is it okay? Is it visible? Is it all good? That's okay, but you can see my full slide at least first. Hello. Okay, so it needs some. What about now? It's going for the first slide, right? Back. Is it okay or still it is showing the next? Is it okay? It's perfect now? Okay. So all the participants, very good evening. Sorry for this technical thing because every time I have to adjust with the new devices and it creates certain technical issues. But nevertheless, actually we are going to start from the 300 series. As if you look at the arrangement of these FAIS, forensic accounting and investigation standards, these standards are arranged in a certain series and it's certain sequences, right? So I think that have been explained by Durgesh Bhai also. So if you see the 100 series is explaining about the basic key concepts. Why this is important? Because the forensic may, as a professional, we may aware about the things or the key concepts which we are going to use while performing the forensic engagements. But for certain other stakeholders, certain key concepts they are not well versed with. So the 100 series was concentrating about the key concepts. 200 series was about the acceptance of the engagement and then communication part of that, how to engage with the agencies. All these things were explained in the 200 series. And as I said, there is a logical arrangement. So it is a full set of standards which covers right from the key concepts up to the reporting. And it does not stop over that reporting part, but it also specifies how to improve the quality part of all these things. So all these are kept in mind while preparing or drafting the standards. So if you look at the 300 series, the 300 series is about an execution part of the engagement or the assignments. As Durgesh Bhai has already clarified about what is the difference between the engagement and the assignments. So this 300 series is specifically talking about the assignment part. So engagement could be a broader terminology and assignment, you can say the sub part of the engagement. So to give an example, the engagement could be an investigation of a particular, let's say the financial statements related fraud, right? So let's assume that in the financial statements, the sales are inflated and the forensic professional, we are not going to call ourselves as a forensic auditor, but we are going to call ourselves as a forensic professional. So while conducting the assignment where or on the broader stage, it is an engagement of investigation, how the financial statements were cooked with the inflated sales. So in that engagement, there could be number of small assignments. So you will have to deal with, how the sales were inflated, what the evidences you will have to gather to prove that whether the sales are inflated or not. Some part of that may be dealing with the digital domain. So you will have to gather the evidences about the recording part of that inflated sales in the digital domain with the use of certain ERPs or certain databases. That could be another portion of that particular engagement. Third portion could be you'll have to apply the analytical tools because the data could be huge. So you'll have to first identify the suspicious transactions with certain red flags. And for that purpose, you may have to develop certain hypotheses on the basis of which you will have to, filter the data, formulate the data, and then you will have to pick up those transactions and then you will trace out the evidences to confirm whether those transactions are real one or the fake one. So all these three parts which I elaborated just now could be the part of the overall engagement, but we are calling it as an assignment. So here the 300 series, if you look upon here, the 300 series is talking about how we can execute the assignments, that smaller portion which we are talking about, a larger part, which is related to the larger part of the engagement. So we are here, as I rightly said by Durgesh Bhai, the 300 series is talking more about the assignment rather than the engagement. The smaller parts of the engagement where we are talking about and its execution part. So the first, of course, whenever we start any engagement or any assignment, we need a planning about that. But why the planning for the forensic assignment is different from the other types of the audit-related planning? Because as a professional, as a chartered accountant, we are quite used to do a planning for the statutory audit. We are quite used to do the planning for internal audit. And we are used to do that because we are handling so many assignments. We may have the experience. Some of the internal or statutory audit assignments or their procedures are well set, right? So we are used to do the planning about that. But here in the forensic, see, there will be less chances, I can say, where you will find the repetitive nature of the same assignment. What do I mean to say? You will not every time get an assignment in the forensic, let's say, where the sales are inflated. You will not get the repetitive assignments where the procurement frauds would be there. You will not get the repetitive assignments where the digital forensic will be required. So some uniqueness is always there in the forensic assignment, depending upon the nature of the allegations, depending upon the suspicious transactions, depending upon the facts which we have to identify through that assignment. So each and every assignment under the forensic is quite different one. So there is no uniqueness in all these things. And that's why the planning for each of those assignments requires a different approach altogether. I hope you might have already discussed with the Durgesh Bhai that the nature of assignment or the nature of engagement. So there are three types of the engagement which we cover for the forensic. That is forensic accounting, forensic investigation, and the litigation support. So there could be a combination of one of two as an overall engagement. And under that, as I said, because if the forensic accounting is there, then the planning would be different. If the investigation is there, then the planning could be different. And in the litigation support, the planning could be different. So that's why, even though you will find that planning is must, because I can say that without planning, we cannot go ahead and execute the work. So planning is must, but what planning is required to do that? We have to first identify the nature of the engagement, then we'll have to ability to break it down in the smaller part of the assignments, and then we try to plan about each and every assignment. What is planning? So we have to lay down the processes, what work procedures we are going to conduct in this assignment. So what is the basic things which we are going to conduct in the forensic? Most of the time, it is the asset tracing, funds tracing, evidences collections, whatever. I mean, I'm not talking here that planning is starting from with certain biased mind, because in many of the instances, I experienced that whenever the forensic professional approaches towards this forensic engagement or the assignment, they do have a certain biases. So some company is allocating you a forensic work, and then they by saying that this type of fraud might have happened, and they are having certain doubts for certain employees. So in that case, when you are doing a planning, you should not have any biases, right? So you should not plan in a way that considering that, okay, wahan to fraud ho gaya hai, somebody is responsible for that, and all your work procedures are concentrating to prove that the fraud has taken place. It may be the false allegation. We never know. So keeping the neutrality in the mind, right? So without any bias, right from the planning stage, we have to take a stand that without any bias, we have to identify the facts, and whatever the evidences are required, what work procedures, because ultimately asset tracing, funds tracing, or even the evidence collection, it requires the work procedures. And those work procedures, my participant friends, those are definitely different from the audit procedures. So here we have to differentiate what the procedures we are going to do or follow for collection of those evidences, right? And then while defining those procedures, what we should have a knowledge about. So we should have a knowledge about that particular business, understanding the business procedures, right? When we say that we have to understand the business, that means we have to understand the business processes, because without understanding the business processes, we may not able to identify the loopholes where the opportunity is coming for the fraudulent transactions. We have to identify the weaknesses. We have to identify the involvement of the digital domain into that, because in the most of the companies right now, all the business processes are digitally configured, right? So we should have that kind of an understanding of the IT environment. And the risk could be at anywhere. The risk could be at the business process level. The risk could be at the IT level. So when we are developing the work procedures, we have to concentrate about the fraud risk and the risk which could be there in all these processes or at the IT environment also. Probably we have to discuss whatever, because planning will give you the methodology. What is the outcome of the planning? Planning will give you the methodology. How can you are going to collect the evidences, what type of the evidences you will require, and how you are going to collect those evidences. So all this you will have to discuss with the stakeholders, basically the primary stakeholders who has appointed you. As I said, by understanding the environment, if it is typically IT environment in which you are going to collect the evidences, then you will have to deploy the technical experts, you will have to deploy the various technical digital tools to gather the evidences. And then accordingly, you'll have to assess what kind of skilled resources we may require for a particular assignment. Again, I would like to remind or repeat those things that every forensic assignment may be different one, and whatever the resources allocations will be required for those assignments will differ from case to case. So there is no set pattern that this pattern is applicable for all the forensic types of the engagement. Probably by handling all types of the forensic engagement and the assignments, you may then come across with the set patterns, but at the beginning, it may not be like so. So developing the methodology and deciding these factors, like how the technology things will be required, what tools will be required, how skilled resources will be required, and even that whether I may require and services from the expert, which is not within my team. So I will have to find out that answers, and then we'll have to prepare the set of documents which we can be able to communicate to the client, and whereby we'll set out all these methodologies or allocation of the resources. So that is the thing which we'll do in the plan. The next standard, 320. This is very, very important one, because ultimately what we are going to collect, forensic is all about the collection of the evidences. But what type of an evidences? Because we all know as a chartered accountant, we are collecting evidences in the audit also. But the difference between the audit evidences and the forensic related work evidences is that in the forensic, the trace is that the evidences are required to be acceptable to the court of law, right? And that is the differentiating point. And that's why, even though evidence is gathering, the procedure itself will be typically different from those which we are going to apply in the audit. To give an example, suppose I want to confirm the bank balance, which is there in my asset side of the balance sheet. What I do, I normally rely, if I'm doing the audit, what I do, I rely on the, the printouts generated from the internet site of that particular bank, which shows me the outstanding balance at that particular period. And I rely that because I accept that as an audit evidence, because in this case, the auditor has to satisfy himself, right? So by obtaining this confirmation or the statement which is generated from the internet bank site, he can satisfy himself. But in the case of forensic, now here, what is the acceptability? This needs to be acceptable to the court of law. And the court of law will accept as if the evidences are submitted, are collected as per the provisions of the Indian Evidence Act. So even how we are collecting the evidences, and that's why if you see the first point, it talks about evidences needs to be collected from the reliable sources, right? So even our procedures by which we are going to collect or gather the evidences, that procedures will definitely have certain meanings, and that will be also under certain testing if we are not following certain procedure. Because again, to give an example, let's say that we need an evidence in the form of public document. Now here public document means what? Public document does not mean here by the document which is available publicly in open domain. That is not the meaning of public document. Public document is the document which is available with the government authorities, right? So I want a land record. So the land recording authority, revenue authority of the government, they may be keeping the record of all those things. And I want that evidences. So what I will have to do, I will have to follow the proper procedures. I may have to apply with that authority. I will have to pay the fees, and I will have to obtain the certified copies. Then only it will be acceptable to the, ultimately it's the decision whether to accept or not. Of course, it is the authority with the court or with the tribunals. But these are the procedures which we have to keep in mind. So how we are collecting the evidences. And second thing, those evidences needs to be relevant. Evidences could be in any form. So evidences could be in the documentary form, like as I mentioned. Evidences could be in the orally. So when we are going to take an interview, in that way also we may get an evidences, or mostly right now, as most of the businesses are following the IT, information technology domain, digital domain, which I call it. So the evidences could be in the electronic form. And when we are going to collect those evidences, as I said, from the public authorities, or even we are going to collect the evidences from the digital domain, then there are certain precautionary measures which we have to be aware about, and then it will become an evidences. This standard also talks about the documentation. What documentation here? So in a shorter way, we can say that the documentation is our procedures, our working papers, right? We maintain the working papers for audit purposes also. Here, we also have to maintain that working papers. And most of the times, the standard has specified what type of a documentation should be there to demonstrate that you are complied with those standards. And the para 5 of the each standard, it defines what kind of an evidence, what kind of a working papers the forensic professional has to maintain. So that documentation part is also mentioned in this 320. So we will collect a lot of documentation. Some of those documents will be eligible because of applying the testing tests which are quoted in the or provided in the Evidence Act. We may apply those tests, and some of those documents will be eligible to be presented in the court of law, on the basis of which we are going to draw our conclusion, which we are going to mention in the report. But some of those documents which we may not going to attach with the report, but those will give us how we have collected the evidences, right? So the procedures, our work methodology, our working papers, by the method by which we are going to collect the evidences. Let's say that we have submitted application to that public authority. Now it will be the part of the documentation. It will not go to the evidence part, right? So this is a working procedure. This is related to my working papers. Another thing is that suppose I am using a particular tool to extract the evidences in the digital form, right? So that will become the electronic form. So in that case, the chain of evidence, chain of custody, that is a part of documentation. But participants, my friends, that documentation, that is my working paper, but I have to attach that as a part of my procedure with the evidence, because that does have certain values. So some documentation I may have to share, like the chain of custody or the chain of evidences, but certain other methodology which I have drafted on my working papers, those may not be required. Sometimes if you are going to appear for the testimony before the authorities, they may call about that information. At that time, you may require to share, but basically it's the ownership is with the forensic professional. So what is the differentiating point between the evidences? What is the differentiating point between the evidences and documentation? That has been clearly spelled out in this 320 standard. And as we have also come up with the implementation guide. So when you will read these standards, with this implementation guide, you will get a lot of insight about how we can practically implement, how we can make the compliance of all these standards. Because in the implementation guides, you will find examples by taking the various case scenarios, right? 330 is the next standard. It is now execution part. It is a conducting of a work, right? So in the planning stage, we have defined our methodology. As a part of methodology, now we have defined the work procedures. Work procedures always needs to be determined at the planning stage itself with the scope and objective of the assignment, right? So the scope is well defined at the time of acceptance of the engagement. And also for each part of the assignment, we may have to define the scope, or for each part of the assignment, we may define the objective. So when we are gathering the evidences in the digital domain, what is our objective? So we have to collect the reliable evidences by following the appropriate procedure. So appropriate procedure part, that will be my documentation. Evidences which we have gathered, that could be the part of my evidences which I'm going to attach. So here work procedures means the planned activities, right? So in this case, we have mentioned two phases, the phase 1 and phase 2 procedures. In the phase 1 procedure, what is required? So in the phase 1 procedures, it will be your, most of the time you will be involved in, putting up the hypothesis, right? You will take all those document evidences, whether whatever be the hypothesis you are formulating, and whatever be the documents or evidences you have collected, whether it is proving, disproving, or not proving your hypothesis, you will have to revise your hypothesis. Again, you may have to collect the evidences. So in the phase 1 is basically concentrating upon the testing of your hypothesis by collecting the different set of documents and evidences. This is the phase 1. In the phase 2, you may have to go on the field, interact with the various stakeholders. It may be the primary stakeholders, it could be the other stakeholders. So whatever the evidences or the documents you have gathered, you may have to further collaborate those, whatever the information there or whatever the evidences are telling to you, you may have to collaborate those things with these other stakeholders. So you may have to confirm that, okay, particular sales has been done. So you may have to contact with that customer as another stakeholder. Of course, his cooperation is at most required. And if he is ready to cooperate, then you may confirm certain transactions with him. But already you are having that set of documents related to that sales transaction as a part of the phase 1 in your hand. You just wanted to confirm those transactions with that third party as a customer. So those activities are coming in the phase 2. So most of the time, I call it as an on-field kind of an activities where you are taking interviews, you are going to confirm certain things with these other stakeholders, or also you may have to visit these public authorities for these certain nitty-gritties. All these things are coming as a phase 2 activities. So all these things we have clarified in 330. 340 is interesting standard because interview is an important aspect of forensic assignment, right? Because inquiry part of that, most of the information gathering process, we can gather all these things by a technique called interview. Interview, we are going to take not only of the primary stakeholders, but we may involve the other stakeholders also. Basically here, interview, we are talking about unstructured format. It's not an unstructured or informal interview. Here we are talking about a formal structured interview. The information which we are going to gather from the interviewee, we are going to use it either as a part of the work procedure, as a part of the documentation, or some of the information we may gather, which we can produce in the court of law, right? And the third part of the interview, as a part of the work procedure in the phase 2, which is there, which was there in the 330. So we may have certain set of the documents related to that transactions in hand. Now we want to corroborate those transactions with the third parties. So these could be the objectives of the interviews. Now, while we are going to take the interview, we should be very well prepared. We should be planned about that interview. What is the planning here? It's not like that we are going on the fly and started taking the interview. It should not be like that. Because as I said, some of the information we may also going to produce as a part of that interview in the court of law as an evidences, right? So we have to appropriately follow the steps. We have to appropriately define. We have to develop the questionnaire, what we are going to ask. We should have done the study well. Suppose we are going to take an interview with an accountant, let's say, and there is an allegation that the accountant himself or herself is involved into that fraudulent transaction. So rather than taking interview first, what I will prefer, I will do my homework well. I will gather the evidences. I will try to gather all the documentary part before I will study those things, because sometimes the person who is giving the interview, he may try to mislead also. So we should be very careful about that, right? Some protocols also needs to be followed, particularly that interview should be taken within the business time, within the business hours, in the daytime, right? Then we may have to take the help of the primary stakeholders. A representative of the primary stakeholders will be with us. He will not interfere in our interview, but he will be there to facilitate, to make an arrangement. If we are going to, let's say, do a video recording or audio recording, then the atmosphere around that place from where we are going to take the interview, that should be suitable for those kind of a video or audio recording. So that facility all needs to be made available by the primary stakeholders, and we can ask the help. Sometimes a language could be also one of the things which we'll have to take into, because all the languages in India we may not speak. And the person with whom we are going to take the interview, he can speak only the regional languages, which is not very well aware. We are not very well aware about that. So in that case, we may have to take the help of the interpreter also. We may have to define the interview team leader. First, we'll define who is going to take the interview. So we're going to define the interview team, right? Then who is going to ask the question, who is going to record whatever is happening. It may be in the written manner, it may be in the audio recording, in the video recording kind of a thing. And ultimately, we'll have to take the signature of those persons with whom we are taking it. So all these things, if you read these things with the implementation guide, you'll get clarification about how to conduct an interview, how it can be useful to prove or disprove, whatever. I'm not going to take any bias to you only to prove certain fraud or allegation. It may not be, it could be otherwise also, right? And how to keep the confidentiality, because sometimes certain matters which could be very useful, which needs to be collected evidences for, because in the interview we'll get a lot of information. We as I said, we may collect a lot of documents before going for the interview, but there could be the possibility that we may come across very new information for which can act as a fraud risk, which can act as a red flag, and for which we'll have to collect the further more evidences. So he will disclose the interview. In the interview, we'll get the information that particular funds was used by a particular employee, and he used for a purchase of a particular property. So that information we may gather from the interview. Now, that is red flag, right? So what that information itself will not become evidences, but we have collected that information. Now it is our role to trace out those properties and how those properties are funded from. Okay, so that money trail or that fund trail could be the evidences, right? But that is getting triggered from my interview. So all these things we have to keep in mind, and that's why there is a very importance to this part of our procedure, that is conducting the interview. The next standard, 350, is review and supervision, right? Forensic is a team effort, basically. So it's not like that only one person will be able to handle the whole assignment or the engagement, right? So it may be the team efforts, and what is required as a part of the team efforts, that the efforts of all the team members, they are targeted towards achieving the objectives of the assignment. Again, I would like to give a cautious note here. Achieving the objectives of the assignment does not mean that going with the bias to only prove the fraud or fraudulent transaction. It is not. The objectives could be to examine, come out with the facts along with the evidences. So don't go with the bias. And also our team members should be aware about these things, that we are not going with certain biases, right? Otherwise, they will again focus on those things which will only prove the fraudulent transaction. It should not happen. They will also have to consider the other facts also. So in the 350 standards, we have divided that in a two part again. As first is the review and the second is the supervision. So as a part of a review, what we are going to do? So as I said, we are going to give the task. We are going to allocate the resources. Resources means our team members. We may take the help of the expert person also, and we may assign him a specific task. Let's say that, so we don't have any expertise in the data analytics. So we may take the help of the expert who is expert in that data analytics, right? But we'll also have to review the expert's work. That is also mentioned in the 230, right? So as a part of the work of expert, what we are going to do as a review? So we'll have to see that he has understood the objectives of the assignment. He is performing the work within the scope. How he is deciding the methodology by which he is going to collect the data. He is going to apply the various formulas. He is going to, give us the output and whether the output is matching with our requirement. So there could be a continuous communication between you and the expert. That procedures coming as a part of the review. This is an example. The second example could be like, so we are mostly involved into the gathering of the evidences. And when we say we are gathering the evidences, we will go as a team member also, they will collect with a lot of documentation, right? So they will get a huge amount of documents. But each and every document may not be eligible to submit as an evidence, right? So what will happen? That some of those documents could be the part of our engagement procedures, and some of those documents may not be, useful for the submission as an evidence. So all these things will be there. So we'll have to review each and every document, which the team may be calling it as an evidences, but it may not be eligible for the evidences purpose. So all these things we'll have to consider as a part of the review. So we have to see that the team members are doing their work as per the planning, as per the methodology which is assigned to them, and they are enough able to collect the documentation. There is no issue in the work procedures or in the methodology. There are no hurdles. If the hurdles are there, then we'll have to communicate it as a significant matter. So all these things will come under the review. Under the supervision, we'll have to see that we have to give the guidance to our team. So we may have to make them aware about the assignments. We'll have to tell them the background. As a principle, we know that we have to adopt the principle of contextualization of the situation. So that kind of things, or sometime it may be required that we'll have to give them guidance about certain legal matters, certain protocols, right? So all these things comes under the supervision, so as our ultimate objective of whatever be the objective of the assignment and the engagement, that is well achieved within the predefined period, which we are going to define in the planning stage. The next standard is again of importance, and that is 360. That is testifying before a competent authority. As I said, forensic is a part of the legal process. Forensic is a part of the legal process. There is, I can say 90% of the chances, I may be exaggerated a little bit, but at least 70% of the chances are there that whatever the forensic engagement or the assignment you are doing, that may end up with the legal proceedings. right? Because there are involvement of one party, multiple parties. And if some party says whatever is coming out of the forensic report or whatever is coming out of the investigation, it is not acceptable to them. So one or other party, they may take the legal recourse, right? So in that case, when we submit the report, actually, even before submission of the report or most probably after submission of the report, we may have to appear before the competent authority for witness purpose. That is, we call it as a testimony, right? So here, who could be the competent authority? Most of the time, it could be the adjudicating authorities. Who could be the adjudicating authorities? So adjudicating authorities could be the tribunals. Competent authorities could be the courts, right? So we should be very clear about that. So we may appear before the tribunals. We may appear before the court, because see, there is a difference between working with the agencies, right, which is covered under the 200 series, and there is a difference between the testimony part of that. Testimony here will act as a witness, and witness will be in front of the judicial authorities, who could be either adjudicating authorities or the courts, like a competent authorities, right? And all these proceedings called as the legal proceedings or the testimony kind of proceedings. So here we may have to appear for those testimony. There will be the cross-examination, right? So there will be the advocates from either parties, and they will put up certain question. What is essentially be required here? So first thing, we should be aware about that legal proceedings procedures, right? क्या होता है कि many of us may not have been dealt with the court proceedings or the tribunal related proceedings, and they may feel it very new. So we should be aware about how these things are happening in the court as a part of our legal process, how this happens at the tribunal as a part of the legal process. So we should be aware about that. We have to see that we are independently going to give that testimony. There is no conflict of interest. All these principles, which you might have discussed at the initial stage of this, webinar. Then what is required? So most of the time, as a practice, we've seen that the most of the times the advocates, they may put to the question where we have to give yes or no kind of an answer in the testimony, right? So our study about our assignment, our study about our reports, our study about our evidences, those things are quite essential while handling these kind of a testimony, right? We should be having a presence of mind, because if we agar gadbadi ho gayi, so even the report could be good, but because of the testimonies, there could be certain challenges which we are asking ourselves. We are asking the troubles for ourselves. So well studied about our assignment, engagement, our report, evidence. So that is all is quite required when we are going to appear as a witness in front of these competent authorities. So that things we have covered in this 360. The next series is 400 series, and as the name itself suggests, it is a specialized area, right? And in these specialized areas, there are 3 standards. 410, that is about the data analysis. 420, that is about gathering of the evidences in the digital domain. And most important, that is 430, that standards on the loans or borrowings. Why we have covered or why we have treated that as a specialized standards? Because in all these 3, a specific skill set which is different from the forensic accounting may sometimes required, because when we are going to say that we have to use the data analysis, right? Because there could be the possibility that while handling the certain forensic assignment, you will have to deal with a huge amount of the data, and then you'll have to pick up those fraudulent transactions with certain red flags. So manually, it's not possible, right? And it will take a lot of man days also. So in that case, you will gather the data from that particular primary stakeholder or maybe from the other stakeholders. And then you will have to apply the data analytics skill set. And then you will have to find out those transactions which could require the further investigation or further inquiry or collection of the evidences. Even for the funds trailing, even for the asset trailing, you will have to deal with a lot of statements. Let's say from the banking side, so you will collect a lot of banking statements, but you cannot go one by one transaction to trace out those funds trail or asset trail. So there also you'll have to convert those financial statement, bank statement into certain analytical tools, and then you'll have to apply the certain formulas, certain data filters, and then you'll have to come out with those transactions which are very relevant as a part of your asset trail or as a part of your funds trailing. So that requires a specialized skill set. There are number of tools are available right from the Excel sheet, and even in the Excel sheet there are n number of formulas, right? So we may not be expert in all those formulas or handling the voluminous data for that purposes. So we may require to take the help of the person who is expert in that kind of a system. And that's why, as I said, all these standards are treated as a specialized standards. So the first standard 410, it is talking about the data analysis, right? Those who have completed the FFD course, they may be well aware about how can they do the data analysis. Those who are participating without having any background of the FFD course, they need to understand what is the data analysis. So here we collect a lot of data to discover the patterns, to discover the irregularities, to find out certain suspicious transactions, again, to find out certain asset trails or the funds trails. For that, all the purpose, we may require a set of data. But when we are dealing with the forensic, we exactly should be aware about what the data we require. All right. So when there is a suspicion that certain sales transactions are inflated, so I should be well aware about that. I may require the data related data. I may require the sales transaction related data. If it is a procurement front, I may require the inventory data. I may require the purchases related data. Sometimes it will be possible that I may require in both sales and purchase related products. I may require even the non-finance data, that is a production related data. So that requirement is a part of decision as a part of the data analysis for what data I require. So that is the first thing. Then I decide now, I require these three data. I will require inventory data, I will require procurement related data, I will require the production related data. Okay, that's fine. Now I have defined what is my requirement. What is the next step? Where is that data? Whether the data is with the laptop, whether the data is there in the computer, desktop, or whether the data is at the server level, then where are the servers? Whether the servers are within the custody of that particular client, or that servers are at the co-location site, or altogether the data is at the cloud environment. So where is that data? And according to that environment, I will decide how to acquire that data, or I will have to discuss the methodology with the primary stakeholders that how I will get the data. Because why this point is specifically important? Because let us say that the data is in the cloud environment, and your primary stakeholders might have entered into the service level agreement where they have stipulated the clause of NDA where they will not share any, they will not going to disclose any data without the permission of the primary stakeholder. So they may require certain permission. Then you will have to define what kind of data you will require, in what format you will require, whether you require in the Excel format, whether you require in the text format, or whatever other formats you may are requiring the data. So all these things are coming under as a part of the data acquisition. Then you'll have to prepare that data ready to analyze. So you'll have to validate unwanted fields, you'll have to remove, right? And then you'll have to validate those data. Okay, this data is now perfectly ready for my data analysis. Again, one more thing. Whatever the data we are getting, we need to ensure that those are integrated with the overall data which is there with the organization, right? So that test is very, very important. Then we have to maintain that data confidentiality. We have to then apply our processes with the hypothesis. right. As I said, whatever be the irregularities we are concentrating upon, let's say that duplication of the invoices, let's say that the sales are there without having any finished goods inventory in our hands. So all these analytical hypotheses we are going to use, and accordingly we'll analyze the data. So all these things are well explained in 410 series as an applying of a data analysis. The next standard is 420. Generally, we call this evidence gathering in the digital domain as a digital forensic, right? But we are not restricted this terminology as a digital forensic, but we are given that a larger perspective that evidence is gathering in the digital. Why it is so? Because typically you will have to deal with the data, or you may have to gather the evidences even in the social media, isn't it? So there is a possibility that the data could be anywhere in the digital domain, not only within the organization, but outside the organizations. And for that purpose, basically, when we are going to submit this, digital evidences, we normally call it as digital evidences, but in the Evidence Act, it is recognized as an electronic record. What Indian Evidence Act talks about this digital evidence, they talk it about an electronic records. So there is section 65UB, which has given certain conditions about the reliability and acceptability of those electronic records as an evidence. So there are 4 basic conditions. The first basic conditions is that the computers are used regularly, right? Informations are fed continuously, and then there is no operational difficulty, or there is no major maintenance activities which are disturbing the processing part of that, and the test of reproducibility. So those things are there in the Indian Evidence Act as a provision. But in this 420 standards, then we have given the guidelines that how we can, what needs to be done to gather those electronic records. So first basic thing here, when we are going to start the evidences gathering in the digital domain, we need to understand the overall information system environment, right? Why it is so? Because if we don't understand the IT environment, then we may not able to identify that what data is actually required to be gathered. Sometimes we may gather only transaction-related records as a part of the electronic records. But what about its trails? There could be different audit trails, right? There could be different set of logs. Logs not necessarily related to the transaction logs, because many of the times we see that logs means transaction related logs. It's not necessarily be so, because a particular transaction might have been taken from a particular endpoint or a desktop or a particular electronic device. So we may have to trace out those devices also with the IP, with the network footprints. So that is also part of our evidence gathering, right? So that's why we need to understand the total IT environment, what data is exactly required. It's not only in the sales related transaction, but we will have to pick up the data. Okay, कौन से डिजिटल डिवाइस से ये ट्रांजैक्शन इनिशिएट किए गए हैं, whether it is from the mobile, whether it is from the laptop, whether it is from the particular desktop, what is the IP of that, who is the service provider, where are the network footprints. All that is a part of a collection of the evidences. So all that is a part of IT environment, and without understanding the total environment of the IT, we may not able to collect all those required evidences, and then there will be the incompleteness of the collection of the evidences. What is ultimately required? The completeness of the evidences. So we will try to gather as much possible as evidences which we are going to attach and submit in the legal proceedings. So understanding of that IT system, that is very, very essential. Without that, we may not able to proceed with the collection of the data. Then when we are going to collect the evidences, we may gather through a different set of tools. You can say that digital forensic tools. There are a number of tools for different types of the digital record. So if we want to collect the data from the mobile, then there are different tools. If we want to collect the data from the email, then we may use different tools. So depending from where we are going to collect the evidences, we may select a tool. Sometimes we'll do the image of the hard disk, but while we are doing the image of the hard disk, then we'll have to use that write blocker kind of things. So all these parts are necessarily be kept in mind. An important part while collecting these evidences in the digital domain is, the chain of custody and chain of evidences. Because one team may gather that at the crime site, the second team may hand over it to the digital lab, and the third team will analyze those and will present the outcome of that with the chain of. So all these things needs to be maintained in a record that is called as a chain of custody. So that is very essential, and that has been well explained in this digital domain. The next standard is, again, we have included purposefully as a specialized standard loans or borrowings, right? Many of us may be dealing with the banking sector for audit purposes. So they may find that, okay, why that is included as a specialized. So let me tell you, friends, most of the assignments, because in India at least, we can witness that whatever be the frauds which are right now getting up, we are hearing up, all those frauds are mostly related to the loans or borrowing related things. And mostly those are related to the banking or financial sectors. Of course, we are having the opportunity. And there was also need from the various stakeholders. So they were also asking about what exactly needs to be done in the forensic of the loan frauds or the borrowing related frauds. So they wanted a guidance. And that's why we are specifically included as a specialized standard 430 for that purpose. So basically, in this 430 as a loans or borrowings, we have defined the key terms, what is loan, what is borrowing. So basically, it includes all those fund-based and non-fund-based facilities. So it includes the guarantees also, letter of credit also. And not only that, but it goes beyond that. Even the personal level borrowings, unsecured kind of borrowings or loans, all those things are also involved. Also, misutilization of the funds, that term is also defined. Mostly we use outside or generally in the fraud cases as a siphoning of the funds or diversification of the fund, but basically it is a misutilization of the funds. And that because loans and borrowings are typically the contracts, those are the agreements, and anybody who is taking the loans or borrowings, obtaining the loans or borrowing, it is for a specific purpose. And that purpose is readily mentioned in that contract or in the loan agreements. And if those funds are not getting utilized for the purpose which are mentioned in the contract, then there could be certain disputes. So how to discover the evidences, how to gather the evidences about these loans and borrowings, how to understand basically the disputes, because there are different types of the disputes. Indicative list is also given in the standards. So disputes could be like that, as I have first given that the loan amount or the borrowings amount is not utilized as per the contractual terms and conditions, right? So purpose, whatever is mentioned in the loans or borrowings agreement, those are not achieved by using of those funds, right? Sometimes it may be possible that whatever be the assets which are offered as a security, so real estate which is offered as a security, actually that is not owned by the borrower, or even certain Benami properties which could be offered as a securities. So then with other things or other frauds are coming up, then it is coming to the knowledge of the banks or financial institution, okay, the property which we have taken as a security, that is actually the Benami property. And then the provisions of the Benami Transaction Prohibition Act will cover. Or it may be possible that the asset or the security which is offered, that is not at all in existence, right? In many cases, like the stocks are hypothecated, right? Vehicles are also hypothecated. Without the knowledge of the banks or without, in many cases, cash credit accounts, even though the stocks are hypothecated, in particular borrower case, which is turned out as a non-performing asset, and if you visit that borrower's, place, then you will find that there is no stock at all. Where the stock has gone. So actually the security is not in existence. Possibility is also there that the borrower may submit the forged or falsified documents. So it's not the real one. And at the initial level, it may not become knowledgeable to anyone, possibly. But subsequently, when you trace out financial statement, take an example of a financial statement. So in the financial statement, the borrower is showing that the turnover is good, achieving the targets, the profits are there. The borrower is making a good amount of the profits. But actually, when you analyze the financial statements, when there is a suspicious nature of transactions are there in the sales, then it may be possible that the transactions which are there in the financial statement, those are not relevant, and the transactions or the financial statements are manipulated one. Similar things are there for the stock statements also. So sometimes stock statements are quoting n number of quantities with the inflated values, and actually, if you see on the place, there is the absence of stock. So all these are the nature of the disputes for which the evidences needs to be collected. And all these things are guided in this 413 standard, which we say that it is a specialized set of a standard. The next two series, 500 series and 600 series, right? So basically, 500 series is about an important aspect, that is reporting of results. What is the outcome of the forensic? Is the forensic report, isn't it? And whatever be our conclusion, right? Forensic is a conclusion-driven engagement. It's not an opinion-based. That's why it is different than the audit, right? In audit, what we do, we express our opinion. But here, as a principle, also you might have been discussed that we have to keep the facts that is separate from our opinion. We are not here to express the opinion about anything. If we don't get the evidences, then also what we state, we are not able to collect the evidences. Whatever be the reasons for non-collection of the evidences, that will report. And that's why we are unable to give any conclusion on that matter. That could be our report. Right? But here we will not, because if we are not getting the evidences and because of on the basis of certain reflex, we are not going to give any opinion about those transactions. So that we have to keep in mind. So that's why there is an importance of the report. What needs to be reported? Basically, as I said, it is a conclusion. And how we can arrive at the conclusion? One simple thing, we have to arrive at the conclusion on the basis of evidences which you are collecting. So conclusion is evidence driven. That is the first point. In the audit, normally, of course, this reporting result, we are talking about the final written report. It may be possible that a progress report may be asked at certain in certain engagement. The primary stakeholder may ask us to give a progress report. Progress report is a part of the communication, is a part of 250 standards. So whatever we have done so far, if the lengthy engagement is there, which is going over a period of, let's say, 2 and 3 months. So every month they expect us to submit, or every fortnight they may expect us to submit the progress report. But that is a part of the communication, right? And that we are going to decide at the initial stages when we are accepting the engagement under 210, right? So we are going to issue the engagement letter and all these things, or 220 standard. Once we decide that we will submit the progress report, that is a communication. So it is not coming under 510. Interim report may be there because certain times before issuing the final reports, they may ask us to submit the interim report. That could be there. But this 510 is typically talking about the final written report, which is conclusion driven on the basis of evidences which we are collecting, right? So we are going to address this report, of course, to the agency which we are getting appointment from. We are calling it here as a primary stakeholders. Whether to share that with other stakeholders, because when there is a fraud, when there is a scam, and when we are going to investigate those things, a lot of other stakeholders are also interested in that fraud report, forensic report, right? So it could be public at a large, it could be media. So they are very, very interested. But at the acceptance stage itself, we have to decide to whom we are going to share the report. Basically, we are going to address it to the primary stakeholders. We are going to submit the report to the primary stakeholders, but with the permission of the primary stakeholders, we may share that with the other stakeholders. Of course, in the legal proceedings where we are going to appear as for the testimony, or when we are going to deal with the agencies, there they may ask for that report, but it is a legal binding on us. It is a part of the legal proceedings. So there we may have to submit the report. But apart from that things, we may not able to share the report with the other ones. Since all these forensic engagements are unique one, so reporting format is not a fixed one. All right. So for each engagement, you will have to define the reporting format by discussing with the primary stakeholders. Sometimes it may be possible, like when you are engaging yourself with the law enforcement agencies like the police or like the CBI or like the ED, they may have predefined their format. It may be possible. So they may request you that this is our format, and in this report, you will have to submit the report. But that all these things you will have to understand while accepting the report, while accepting the engagement. Otherwise, if there is no such prescribed format, then you will have to decide in what format you are going to submit the report. And that is at the initial stage, right? So basically, we'll discuss that with the primary stakeholders. Of course, what should be the contents of the reports? That I will cover. But look at the point number 7 in this PPT, which is very, very important. The report shall not express an opinion or pass any judgment on the guilt or innocence. Many of the times, friends, what happens here? When we are going to deal as a forensic expert, as a forensic professional, the stakeholders, it could be the primary stakeholders or it could be the other stakeholders, what they expect? They expect that, okay, in our forensic report, we will name somebody X or Y who has done this fraud. So he is the fraudster. That is their expectation. So when we are naming that X is the fraudster, or we are saying that, okay, no, X is not a fraudster, either way, that means there we are passing an opinion or we are passing the judgment about X. Whether we do have an authority? Of course not. There is an allegation. For the allegation, there is a legal process. As a part of the legal process, we are collecting the evidences. We'll only state, okay, the transactions have taken place in the bank account of X. We will give the details of those transactions, right? But because of that, whether X is a fraudster or not, that decision will be only given by the court, considering the provisions of the law under which the charge sheet is filed. In the charge sheet, they will they will name the section of the law, right? But that filing of the charge sheet, mentioning of the section, that is all the responsibility and authority of the law enforcement agencies, and to decide whether X or Y is guilty or not, that is totally authority with the court of law. So in no way, it may be possible that many of the times you may be asked by that agency who is appointing you to quote the name of that person who has done the fraud. When you quote the name of that person, X has done the fraud, so you are giving a judgment. That is not allowed, right? But yes, you can give all the details of the transaction. You can give all the details of the facts along with the evidences, what transactions have taken place, whether those transactions are fraudulent one or not, that also you can give. But because of that, you cannot say that the X is guilty or Y is guilty or not. That is something we should be take care about, right? It may be possible because this is a forensic, right? So there may be possible that there are different types of the risks associated with the forensic professional itself, because we are going to collect the evidences from various third parties. We are calling it as other stakeholders. We are going to collect the evidences from suppliers. We are going to collect the evidences from customers, isn't it? They may cooperate with us. They may not cooperate with us. Both the things, because it is not binding on them. It is not compulsion for them. Right. Of course, what the standard 250 says, if any third party, any other stakeholders from whom we have to gather the evidence, if they are not cooperating, then it becomes our responsibility as per 250 to communicate this immediately as a significant matter to our primary stakeholder. Why it is essential? Because that particular third party, they may not be cooperating with us by direct approach of ours, but when we'll communicate to our primary stakeholder, then primary stakeholder will take necessary steps so that that third party will cooperate. Typically, this question comes in case of a loan fraud. So the bank may appoint us as a forensic purpose, and we may have to gather the evidences from the borrower, right? But there is no law under which the borrower is bound, or it is mandatory for the borrower to give that cooperation with us. If it is a police, if it is a CBI, then there is a binding because they do have a legal authority, right? So in such a case, what will happen? The borrower may not cooperate. Borrower will give incomplete information. Borrower will destroy the evidence. That is also possible. Borrower will not hand over the evidences. All these things are possible. So in that case, what the 250 says, standard 250 says that, okay, these things are happening. Okay, well, we are aware about that. Now let us inform that as a significant matter to my bank. Why this is so? Because if I will not inform them, and if we simply report that because of the non-cooperation from the borrower, we are not able to conclude. Okay, fine, that we can do. Ultimately, we are going to do that. But in between that, there is a possibility that bank will take certain actions, bank will do certain things so that the borrower will start cooperating with us. That is also possible, isn't it? So this thing needs to be communicated as a part of standard 250. But even after that, the borrower is not cooperating, then we don't have any choice but the report that because of certain circumstances or because of non-cooperation from the borrower, we are not able to collect the evidences, and that is going to impact our report, and we are not able to conclude certain things. So that is well within our hand, and we will going to report that in the part of the report. Right. What other points we have to keep in mind when we are, submitting the reports? So basically, we have to give the title. We have to define the addressee. Basically, most of the time it is the primary stakeholders. As I said, at the time of acceptance, we will decide apart from the primary stakeholders who are the other stakeholders with whom we may share the report, and if that is there, then we'll include that as a part of the distribution list. Otherwise, we will not share that. What are the scope and objective of the assignment? Of course, that is essentially be required. Our work methodology, which we have defined at the planning stage, all those work methodologies we will going to mention in our report. We will require an executive summary because for certain higher authorities, they may be interested only in that executive summary. They may not spend that much enough time to go all the details of the report. So it is essentially necessary to give the executive summary. If we have used the work of an expert, so we'll have give the details about that expert, in which area we have used his expertise, what is the outcome of his work, and how we are incorporating the details or the evidences which are collected by that particular expert. And even we have not taken any cognizance. So it may be possible that we have appointed an expert, but we are not going to incorporate the findings of that expert or evidences we are not going to consider. So that also we will mention in the report. Basically, we have to mention in our report at the beginning itself, I may say that because now these forensic accounting and investigation standards, those are mandatory from the first. So essentially, my dear friends, we have to mention that we have performed this forensic engagement as per the provisions of this forensic accounting and investigation standards. Because now everybody, In India, they are aware about that these standards are published, the standards are mandatory. So right now, even you are going to face any legal proceedings. So when you are going to appear before the competent authority, adjudicating authorities, or when you are going to appear before these law enforcement agencies to provide the information, they will ask you the first question कि भाई साहब आपने forensic accounting standards का आपने comply किया है. So that will be the question, and you will have to demonstrate that yes, you have done that. How you can demonstrate? You can demonstrate that by keeping the documents which are mentioned in each and every standard. I am again repeating that all those things are mentioned in para number 5. Of course, we are going to give us the findings, right? Findings, conclusions, and that is supported by the evidences. Also, we are going to mention about how we have obtained those evidences and how those are relevant for the matters. In certain cases, it may be possible that we may assume something. Most of the time, I may say that it should not be, but even in certain cases, you are making certain assumption. That assumptions, its impact on our conclusion, all that needs to be clearly elaborated in the report. Any limitation, non-cooperation, limitation, not collection of the evidences, destroying of the evidences. There could be life-threatening situation. All that could be possible. So all these things we are going to mention in the report, and ultimately the conclusion. That is very, very important one. The last standard is quality control. Yes, the standards are there. These standards are there so that, why these standards are there? The standards are there so that the public at large, the stakeholders who are involved in this forensic kind of an arena, they should understand that the forensic professionals are performing the assignments or engagement with the predefined quality procedures, SOPs, standard operating procedures. And that's why these procedures are well defined in the standards. And as I said from the beginning, the standards are quite logically arranged from 100 to the 600 series. So it is a full set in the first time in the accounting world our institute has published. And that's why quality is continuous thing. We have to always care about the quality performance. We have to always look at how we can improve the qualities, what the best we can do. And every assignment will give you certain learnings to improve your quality, right? So for every engagement, you will have to assess what quality, whether you have maintained or not. Basically, you have complied with all these standards, right? So, and that quality evaluation, I can say, is before issuing the final reports, right? After issuing the final reports, you cannot, I'm not saying that you cannot do that, but suggestion or advice is that before issuing the final report, you should do the quality assessment of your all the engagement and assignments, whether whatever is planned, whether that is going to be delivered, whatever is the methodology we have adhered to that, whatever be the provisions of the which we eligible the documents as an evidences, whether we are basically the chain of custody, chain of evidences, electronic record related certification. So whether we have adhered to that. So all this is a requirement before issuing of the reports, and all these things will be the part of the quality assessment related to that standard. And that's why there should be a quality control system, quality control mechanism that should be in a place. And if we are totally specializing as a firm only on the forensic assignments, so we are handling a lot of forensic engagements. Okay. So as a forensic services of a firm, then there is requirement to carry out the peer review of our services. So that is also mentioned. Not only from that, we can say that to keep ourselves updated with whatever the things which are happening around us, we should keep ourselves updated by the continuous professional education, right? Continuous professional development. And for that purpose, it is mandated in the standard that at least 5 of the CP hours should be devoted or should be come from the forensic related workshops, seminars, or training programs, something like that. So all that we have mentioned in this 610. So these are the standards. And as I said, The set of standards, first time released in the accounting world. We should be very proud about that. Not only that, the standards are mandatory. Along with that, we have issued the implementation guide with the examples, with the procedures. And when you will read, you will understand the standards with those implementation guide. It will be very easy for you to actually implement these things in your practical life. Because whenever we have developed, whether it is a forensic accounting or investigation standards, or it is an implementation guide, we have given utmost importance about its practicality, application of all these two documents in the practical environment. So all these things we have definitely considered, and that's why in the implementation guide you will find a different case scenarios. In the different case scenarios, how you can implement each and every standards, we have given illustrations, examples, all that in the implementation guide. So my suggestion is that please read these standards along with the implementation guide. That will make your life very easy, and it will be very helpful for you to apply in the practical scenario. With that, I'm making my full stop here.
Sir, sir, I request you to please have a look at the two questions which I have posted in the chat box.
Okay. Just a minute. Okay, so the first question, if it is not forensic audit, the first thing we'll have to be very careful about that is that henceforth, the forensic services will not be called as a forensic audit, it will be called as a forensic accounting. Why is that? We collect evidences, still fail to understand the difference between the forensic audit. Are the outcomes different from the forensic? No. Okay, good question. What is the difference? Why we are saying that we should use the terminologies of forensic accounting rather than the forensic audit? So that is the basic understanding which the participant may be required from the question number one. See, what is happening? There are different types of the audit. There are statutory audit, there are tax audit, there are systems audit, there are internal audit. I understand that practically, even in the courts or even in the law enforcement agencies, they are using in practice the word forensic audit. I understand that. But what is happening? The general stakeholders, as a professional, I can understand the difference between the forensic audit and the other audits, I mean, statutory audits and the internal audit and so on. But other stakeholders, they may not understand the difference. Why? What has been started thereafter? So they are expecting somewhere the statutory auditor to conduct the statutory audit in the form of forensic audit. But the objective of the statutory audit, objective of the forensic services are totally different. Statutory audit or any audit for that purpose is an opinion-based report. Forensic is always a conclusion-based report. That is the first thing. In the forensic, we are going to use accounting skill set, we are going to use auditing skill set, we are going to use investigation skill set. In the audit, normally, we only use accounting skill set, auditing skill set. In every audit, there is no necessity to use the investigation skill set, right? And that's why audit is a reasonable assurance, right? And in the reasonable assurance, we say that we are doing the audit on the sample basis. We are collecting the evidences in the audit which will satisfy the auditors. But here in the forensic, we have to collect the evidences which are going to satisfy the court of law, right? And that's why use of accounting, use of auditing skill set, use of investigation skill set, that makes these forensic services different from the audit. That is the first thing. Second thing, as I said, it started certain misconfusion. Lightly, I can say that in one particular bank, they started asking me whether we can do this forensic audit on a monthly basis. So they thought that, okay, forensic audit, koi naya audit aa gaya hai. Apart from the internal audit, apart from the statutory audit, now the forensic audit is something. It's not like that. And that's how the confusion has started. When we use the terminology as a forensic audit, then there will be the question, when it is an audit, which standards you are going to apply? Whether it is an auditing standards we are going to apply, whether it is internal auditing standards we are going to apply, or whether it is a forensic standards we are going to apply. So that it will create a lot of confusion amongst sometimes in the professionals, because professional may easily understand that, but other stakeholders may not easily understand that. So to avoid that confusion, and there is a differentiating factors, right? All those differentiating factors, my friend, we have elaborated clearly if you read the implementation guide and in the implementation guide, which is related to the forensic accounting and investigation standard 110 and 210, you will understand definitely the difference between that. And that's why categorically now we are saying that it is not the forensic audit, it is a forensic accounting and investigation standard. Why forensic audit is an insurance work? It is because the report format is given ICI, whereas the no. It's not like that. See, when the reporting format will not make any differentiation. It is not like that. Even for the forensic services, as I said, in certain law enforcement agencies, they may have their own reporting format. So reporting format is not a differentiating point. The approach, use of skill set, and ultimately the outcome and the evidence collection procedure and ultimately the eligibility of the evidence, all that is the differentiating points, and that's why it is different from the audit, these forensic services, right? And that's why we are calling it again as a forensic accounting and investigation services. And we are not going to call it as a forensic audit. Again, I'm saying that it is going to create a lot of confusion in the minds of the stakeholders. So that's my answer to these two questions. So Kunal,
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for this insightful session and very informative session. And I would like to thank you also for being a part as a pillar to the group who have developed forensic accounting and investigation standard. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank
With
you,
this,
Kunal,
I would also like to thank Chair. Thank you, sir. I would also like to thank Chairman, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, Secretary, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, our faculty members, our DAP team, and technical team. Thank you, everyone. With this, we are ending this session. Good night.